50 meters below the streets north of Tokyo, there is a room that looks like it belongs in a myth. 59 concrete pillars, each weighing 500 tons, rise 18 meters into the dark, taller than a 5-story building, holding up a ceiling the length of nearly 2 football fields laid end to end. Walk between the columns, and the sound of your own footsteps echoes for seconds. Light falls in long shafts from vents far overhead, and the air is cold and still, the way it is in old stone temples that have sat undisturbed for centuries. Engineers call it a pressure-adjusting water tank. Everyone else calls it the underground temple. It was never built to be beautiful. It was built to hold something far less romantic than a myth: floodwater. Not a trickle of it, but enough to overwhelm a metropolitan region of over 35 million people if it were left with nowhere to go. Rivers pushed past their banks, streets turned into canals, entire neighborhoods swallowed within hours, sometimes before anyone above ground even realized how fast it was rising. So why did Japan spend over a decade and more than $2 billion digging a cavern large enough to swallow a stadium, all just to stop rain, in a country that had already been fighting floods for generations? To understand why, you have to look at where Tokyo actually sits. Much of the metropolitan area lies in the basin of the Nakagawa and Ayase rivers, a low-lying depression that naturally collects runoff from the surrounding highlands like a shallow bowl. For centuries, that wasn't a crisis. Rice paddies, forests, and open fields absorbed the rain and let it drain slowly back into the earth. The land, in effect, breathed with the seasons, soaking up monsoon rains and releasing them gradually over weeks. Then the city grew, and grew fast. After 1955, Japan's post-war economic boom paved over the basin at a staggering pace. Urban surface area in the region climbed from just 5% in 1955 to more than half by the 2010s. Concrete, asphalt, and rooftops replaced soil that used to soak up rainfall like a sponge. Water that once sank quietly into the ground now had nowhere to go but sideways, pooling in streets, seeping into homes, overwhelming the same narrow rivers that were carved out long before anyone imagined a city this dense sitting on top of them. Layer typhoons onto that equation, and the danger compounds fast. Japan sits directly in the path of the Pacific typhoon belt, and every monsoon season the region braces for storms capable of dropping a month's worth of rain in a matter of hours. For decades, flooding wasn't an occasional disaster here, it was closer to routine. Trains stopped running, basements filled, emergency crews scrambled through the same low-lying neighborhoods year after year, and the economic toll from damaged homes, halted commerce, and disrupted infrastructure added up relentlessly, storm after storm, long before anyone in government was willing to call it a crisis. The breaking point arrived in September 1991, when Typhoon Mireille tore through Japan, the most powerful storm to strike the country in 30 years. It flooded neighborhoods across the region, crippled transportation and infrastructure, and made painfully clear that incremental drainage upgrades weren't going to cut it anymore. Existing rivers and canals in the basin simply didn't have the capacity to absorb a storm of that magnitude, no matter how many small-scale reinforcements had been added over the previous decades. Tokyo didn't need another patch. It needed something radical, something built on a completely different scale than anything the country had attempted before, capable of intercepting floodwater long before it ever reached the streets people actually lived on. The answer took shape underground, out of sight, and largely out of mind for most residents living directly above it. Construction began in the early 1990s on a site stretching between the towns of Showa and Kasukabe in Saitama Prefecture, just north of central Tokyo. The location wasn't chosen at random. It sat at almost the exact point where overflow from several smaller, flood-prone rivers could be intercepted and redirected before any of it reached the densely packed heart of the capital. The engineering goal was almost deceptively simple to state, even though achieving it would be anything but: capture floodwater from multiple rivers before it could overwhelm them, funnel that water underground through a controlled system, and release it safely into the one river in the region large and stable enough to absorb it, the mighty Edo River. Everything downstream of that single sentence, the shafts, the tunnels, the tank, the pumps, exists to make that one transfer possible, reliably, during the worst storms Japan could throw at it. The project became known informally as GCANS. The name traces back to a local civic initiative connected to the site and its neighboring pump station, focused on turning the facility into something the surrounding community could actually engage with, rather than treating it as an anonymous, sealed-off piece of infrastructure. What's less settled, even now, is the precise meaning behind the letters themselves. Different accounts describe the name's origin differently, and no single official explanation has become the definitive one. What did stick, officially, was the project's full title, the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel. Over the next 13 years, it would grow into the largest facility of its kind anywhere on Earth. To understand the true scale of what was built here, it helps to start at the surface and work your way down, piece by piece, the way engineers had to design it. Scattered across the landscape are 5 massive concrete shafts, sunk vertically into the earth like enormous drainage wells. Each one is 65 meters deep and 32 meters wide, large enough that you could lower an entire space shuttle into one and still have room to spare around the edges. These shafts are the intake points of the whole system, the first line of defense where overflow from the surrounding rivers pours in the moment a storm pushes water levels past a safe threshold. From there, the water doesn't just sit and wait for someone to deal with it. It's drawn by gravity into a connected network of tunnels running 6.3 kilometers beneath Route 16, buried 50 meters underground, deeper than most subway lines running through the same city above. Each tunnel measures 10 meters in diameter, wide enough to comfortably drive a bus through, and each one was carved using massive tunnel boring machines that chewed steadily through the earth while simultaneously laying concrete segments behind them, sealing the passage as they advanced meter by meter, month after month. Together, these tunnels move floodwater from shafts 2 through 5, funneling everything toward shaft number 1, and from there toward the true heart of the whole system. That heart is the tank, the underground temple itself. It stretches 177 meters long and 78 meters wide, standing 25.4 meters from floor to ceiling. To put that into perspective, you could fit a full professional soccer pitch inside it, with room left over on every side, and the ceiling alone would rise well above the upper deck of most modern stadiums. Holding that ceiling up are the 59 reinforced concrete pillars, each one weighing 500 tons, each one standing 18 meters tall. They're arranged with an almost architectural precision in long, evenly spaced rows that recede into the gloom like the columns of an ancient hall. It's easy to see why people who walk through it describe the feeling as stepping into a cathedral. But every design choice here serves a function first and an aesthetic second. The pillars aren't decoration, they're load-bearing structure, engineered specifically to withstand the immense pressure of tens of thousands of tons of churning water moving through at once, storm after storm, year after year, without fail. Every part of this structure had to survive conditions most buildings never face: constant exposure to fast-moving water, cycles of flooding and draining that repeat dozens of times a year, and pressure loads that shift unpredictably depending on how a given storm behaves. Engineers didn't just have to build something big, they had to build something that could take that kind of punishment for decades without cracking, shifting, or failing at the exact moment it mattered most, when an entire region was depending on it holding. This is the part of the system that turns an abstract engineering statistic into something you can actually feel standing inside it. A space built entirely out of necessity that somehow, almost accidentally, ended up looking like it was built out of wonder. Impressive architecture alone doesn't stop a flood. You also need the raw, brute force power to move that much water back out again, fast enough to matter before the next wave arrives. That job belongs to the pump station attached to the main tank, one of the most powerful drainage systems ever built for civilian use. At its core are 4 primary pumps, driven by a 14,000 horsepower gas turbine engine, a design directly adapted from the kind of turbines used to power aircraft in flight. Working together, these pumps can push a combined total of 200 cubic meters of water out of the tank and into the Edo River every single second. Not per pump, but as a system, all 4 working in concert. To visualize that number, it's roughly the volume of an entire Olympic swimming pool being emptied in about 12 seconds, and the system can sustain that rate continuously for as long as a storm demands it, hour after hour if necessary. The process, in real time, unfolds like a single, continuous machine. As rain intensifies, water rushes into the 5 vertical shafts from the smaller rivers around them, rising fast inside those concrete wells. Gravity pulls it down into the connecting tunnels 50 meters below the surface, where it travels steadily toward the main tank. Once inside, it collects in the underground temple, where the pressure-adjusting design keeps the flow controlled and even, rather than turbulent and unpredictable. From there, the pumps take over completely, hauling the water back up and out through a series of sluiceways, engineered specifically to prevent backflow, so that even as the Edo River itself rises dangerously high during a storm, it can never push water back into the very system that's supposed to be relieving it. It's a closed, one-directional loop: intercept, funnel, hold, expel. Simple to describe in a single sentence. Almost unimaginably complex to actually execute, at this scale, without failure, for over 3 decades. What makes the pump station especially remarkable is that it has to make split-second decisions about timing. Release water into the Edo River too early, before the river itself has room to absorb it, and the system risks worsening the very flood it's meant to prevent. Release it too late, and the tank upstream risks filling faster than it can be relieved. Operators monitor river levels continuously, adjusting the pace of discharge in real time so that the Edo River never receives more than it can safely carry, even during the most extreme storms on record. None of this came quickly, and none of it came cheaply. Construction began in 1993 and wasn't fully completed until 2006. A 13-year undertaking that stretched across changes in government leadership, evolving engineering standards, and shifting economic conditions in Japan along the way. Building 5 separate shafts, boring more than 6 kilometers of tunnel through dense earth, and pouring the concrete for a chamber the size of a stadium doesn't happen on a short timeline, no matter how much funding is behind it. The final price tag landed somewhere between 2 and 2.6 billion US dollars, or roughly 230 billion yen, funded almost entirely through public infrastructure investment rather than private capital. For a country that had already spent decades investing heavily in flood control, it was still an extraordinary commitment of resources to a single project. For that cost and that timeline, Japan built something unmatched anywhere else in the world. The Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel remains, to this day, the largest underground flood diversion facility on the planet, a title it has held since the moment it opened, and one that few other nations have even attempted to challenge, given the sheer scale, cost, and engineering complexity required to try. The real question, of course, is whether any of this actually works, whether all that concrete, all those years, and all that money translated into something residents could actually feel in their daily lives. The answer, by now, is well established. Since becoming operational, the system has been activated well over 150 times, kicking into gear automatically whenever river levels near the danger threshold, often during storms that most residents above ground barely notice. The clearest test came in October 2019, when Typhoon Hagibis, one of the most powerful storms to strike Japan in decades, dumped record-breaking rainfall across the entire region in a matter of hours. The system diverted more than 12 million cubic meters of floodwater away from homes and businesses during that single event. Water that would otherwise have poured directly into the same low-lying neighborhoods that used to flood almost every single year before the channel existed. Officials who operate the facility have pointed to a consistent, measurable outcome over the years. Flood damage in the surrounding area, measured both in the number of homes affected and the total area flooded, has dropped by roughly 2/3 since the system came online. That's not an abstract engineering statistic buried in a report somewhere. That's fewer families evacuating in the middle of the night, fewer businesses shuttered for weeks while water damage gets repaired, fewer neighborhoods quietly written off as perpetual flood zones by insurers and residents alike. Without it, planners generally agree the calculus for this part of the Tokyo region would look drastically different today. Recurring, costly flooding treated as a near-annual certainty rather than a rare and manageable exception. The tunnel didn't eliminate the risk of flooding in Japan. Nothing fully can. What it did was change what a bad storm actually means for millions of people who now live, work, and sleep directly above it, mostly without a second thought. Somewhere along the way, this drainage facility became something nobody quite expected when the first blueprints were drawn: a destination. The nickname Underground Temple wasn't invented by marketers trying to sell tickets. It emerged organically from the very first people who walked into the tank and stood, dwarfed, beneath those towering pillars. Today, guided tours take visitors nearly 100 steps down into the tank itself, letting them stand in the same cavernous space that exists purely to hold back a city's worst storms. Depending on the season and the water level, the chamber can look completely different from one visit to the next, sometimes bone dry and cathedral quiet, other times holding pools of water that mirror the pillars above them. It's become a magnet for photographers, architecture enthusiasts, and curious travelers, and it has shown up repeatedly in films, television, documentaries, and an endless stream of social media posts, all marveling at how something built purely for utility could end up looking this deliberate, this genuinely monumental. In a strange way, that reaction says something important about the project itself. It didn't set out to be a landmark. It became one because good infrastructure, built at the right scale with real care and precision, often ends up looking inevitable, like it was always meant to be there, even though someone had to imagine it first, argue for the funding, and spend 13 years building it underground where almost no one would ever see it. Tokyo's flood risk was never a uniquely Japanese problem, and climate change is only making the underlying pressure more universal by the year. Rising sea levels, more intense and more frequent storm systems, and rapid, unrelenting urban growth are pushing more cities toward the exact conditions that forced Japan's hand decades ago. Dense populations, packed onto low, flood-prone land, with less and less permeable ground, left to absorb the rain that keeps falling harder. Other countries have taken notice, and some have already acted on it. Malaysia's Smart Tunnel in Kuala Lumpur, which cleverly doubles as both a flood diversion channel and an everyday highway, drew directly on the same underlying philosophy. When usable space above ground is scarce and expensive, build the solution below it instead. Urban planners studying flood resilience in cities from Jakarta to Houston to Manila now regularly cite the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel as a reference point for what becomes possible once infrastructure spending finally matches the actual scale of the threat, instead of trailing behind it. The lesson here was never simply build a bigger tunnel. It's that flood control, taken seriously, requires treating water as a permanent, ongoing feature of city planning, rather than an occasional emergency to react to after the damage is already done. Japan didn't wait around for the next Typhoon Mireille to hit before finally acting. It built, deliberately and expensively, for the storm that hadn't happened yet, and in doing so, changed what preparedness could actually look like for the rest of the world, decades before most cities were even asking the right questions. What sits beneath those Saitama suburbs today is, in the end, a simple idea executed at an extraordinary scale. 500-ton pillars, 6 kilometers of tunnel, and pumps powerful enough to empty a swimming pool every 12 seconds, all working in near-total silence until the exact moment a city of millions needs them most. It's easy to admire the size of it, to be drawn in by the cathedral comparisons and the underground temple nickname, but what's actually worth remembering is the reason it exists at all. Not spectacle, but necessity. Engineering, built not to impress anyone standing inside it, but to make sure that the next great storm is just another Tuesday for the people living above it, instead of a catastrophe they never saw coming. That's the real achievement here, not the concrete, not the size. The quiet, unglamorous fact that somewhere beneath Tokyo, right now, a system built decades ago is still doing exactly what it was designed to do. Storm after storm, without applause, without fanfare, simply working. If you want more stories like this, where engineering meets survival, make sure you're subscribed and hit like so more of these reach the people who genuinely want to see them.